Hi friends, my name is Cindy and I am one of the children's librarians in Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. And today we're going to do our final reading of Ivy by Katherine Coville. Are you ready to finish the book? Chapter 12, Wahahaha! Back in the village square, 4 dark figures crept out of the shadows. The trolls had arrived in Broomsweep, and they were up to no good. The biggest troll grunted to the others. The grunt meant, "Drat, there are no humans here. Where has everyone gone?" A short, fat troll grunted back to him. His grunt meant, "Oh, bother, we came all this way for nothing." Suddenly, a tall, thin troll gave an excited grunt, which meant, "I smell humans, lots of them. Let's follow the scent." The last troll sniffed the air with his big nose and grunted back, meaning, "It's humans, all right. Let's go and find them." The trolls sneaked down the side of the cobblestone street, staying in the shadows. They snuffled and snorted, following the human scent past the village square, down the main street, to the other side of town. Closer and closer to Grandmother's cottage. Back on the main road into town, a golden coach with 2 snow-white horses made its way uphill and down, heading toward the Broomsweep village square. It was the Queen's coach, and it was coming to Broomsweep a day early. The coach slowed as it entered the village. Its windows seemed to look out at the village like big, dark eyes. Slowly the coach rolled past prim rows of houses without a speck of dirt. Their windows sparkled, their gardens were trimmed and weeded, and their front steps were all swept. Each house looked like the next, scrubbed clean and perfect, but no one seemed to be home. The golden coach came to a stop in the middle of the square, but the village square was empty. Here's a picture of them at a stop. Far down the street there was a noise. It was the roar of many voices crying out at once. The golden coach followed the noise down the street to the edge of town, where it came upon a crowd of yelling people in front of a small cottage. And there the coach stopped. No one noticed. Standing on Grandmother's front steps, Mistress Peevish was still doing her best to inflame the crowd. "We'll run them out of town ourselves," she cried, and the crowd repeated, "Out of town! Out of town!" "And this mess must be cleaned up, all of it," bellowed the mayor's wife. "Clean the mess! Clean the mess!" the crowd chanted, waving their shovels and rakes and brooms in the air. Deep in the shadows of Grandmother's hazel trees, the trolls were lurking. They'd found the humans at last. And what a delicious assortment of humans it was. The biggest troll grunted to the others, meaning, "I'm going for the noisy one on the steps." And with that, he leaped out of the shadows, bellowing, "Wah-ha-ha-ha!" and snatched up the mayor's wife. Tucking her under one arm like a ball, he charged through the crowd and on down the road. The crowd scattered. "Trolls!" they screamed. "Trolls!" Only then did anyone notice the royal coach with its 2 snow-white horses stopped on the far side of the road. The 2 coachmen looked straight ahead and did not say a word. "It's the Queen!" someone called out. "It's the new Queen!" Everyone gasped in dismay. The mayor's wife had just been snatched by a troll. Now here was the Queen, a day early, right in front of the messiest place ever seen in the village of Broomsweep. Before anyone could think of what to do, the big troll circled back, and the short, fat troll leaped out from under the trees and raced toward him. As they drew even with each other, the big troll tossed the mayor's wife into the air, and the second troll caught her, then tucked her under his own hairy arm and charged down the road. The mayor's wife could only squeak as she bounced along. The 2 trolls ran up and down the road, tossing her back and forth each time they passed. The trolls were so big and so nasty that no one knew where to turn. Who was big enough to fight with the trolls? Then Ivy had a thought. She'd heard the mayor say that he'd better not see any more magical creatures. She knew that the whole town wanted them to go away, too, and she knew that the queen must be watching from her coach, but there was only one way to stop the trolls. Ivy raced out through the back door and up to Cedric's nest. "Cedric!" Ivy cried as she reached the huge nest behind the house. "Oh, Cedric, we need your help. There are trolls on the loose. They've got the mayor's wife. Hurry!" Cedric poked his head up and squawked loudly. "Trolls, you say? Griffins hate trolls. Where are the trolls? Where?" Poof began to bark. Ivy ran on down the path to the stream, calling to Balthazar. Cedric took off into the air, while Poof ran straight to the hazel trees and yapped frantically at the trolls who were still hiding there. The last two trolls leaped out. The tall, thin one grabbed Poof, tucked him under his arm, and sprinted down the road after the first two trolls. The big-nosed troll charged after him with a grunt, which meant, "Wait for me! I saw him first!" Then all four trolls circled around, flinging Poof and Mistress Peevish high in the air, catching them and tossing them back up again like jugglers. They did it again and again. Flying overhead, Cedric dove toward the big-nosed troll who had Poof. "I guard the Poof!" he crowed, and grabbed the troll's shoulders with his strong, eagle-like claws. The troll dropped Poof, but the short, fat troll snatched him up and ran in the other direction. As the griffin turned to chase after the troll, Ivy and Balthazar arrived. The dragon watched while the short, fat troll and the biggest troll raced along the road, flinging Poof and the mayor's wife back and forth to each other. Some of the villagers ran this way and that, while others were frozen in terror. "This is bad," confirmed Balthazar. "What?" asked Ivy. "They are a plague and old troll, Gabe. It's called four-man wumpus. We've got to stop them before they reach the goal." Chapter 13, Snatched. "Where is the goal?" Ivy asked the dragon. "I can't tell yet," answered Balthazar, "but they usually use something big and shiny." Ivy looked around. The biggest, shiniest thing she could see was the royal coach. A prickle of fear went up her back. "Then what will they do?" Ivy asked hastily. "What are the rules of four-man wumpus?" "There are no rules. They just cause as much trouble as they can, and then they throw whatever they are using for a ball down at the goal and wump it very hard." Ivy watched helplessly as Poof was tossed again from one troll to the next. Meanwhile, Cedric was perched on the biggest troll's shoulders, pecking its head with his beak. "Can't you stop them?" cried Ivy. "I'm an old dragon and not as fast as I used to be, but I will try." Balthazar charged into the road, breathing fire. The trolls looked up at him in surprise and then made vile noises at him and went back to playing their game wilder and faster than before. Here they are. When the big-nosed troll looped around, juggling Poof from one hand to the other, the griffin flapped his huge wings in the troll's face. The troll dropped Poof on the ground, where the tiny dog immediately nipped his ankles. Balthazar let loose a flame and toasted the troll's backside. "Yowie!" shrieked the troll as he scrambled away down the road with smoke coming from his tail. Before the dragon could catch his breath, another troll swooped down and snatched Poof up again, hurling the little dog high in the air. As the three remaining trolls raced around, juggling their bundles back and forth, the dragon and the griffin circled them carefully. They had to get the trolls without hurting Poof or the mayor's wife. Ivy could hardly stand to watch. There had to be something else she could do, some way to help, but she was afraid she was just too little. Little! Suddenly she had an idea. Pixies! They were the littlest people of all, but they had managed to chase the neighbors away the day before, and they had bothered Peter almost to the point of tears when she told them to attack him this morning. Would they fight trolls if she asked them? Ivy ran to the back of the garden and stood under the apple tree where the pixies were staying. "Pixies, help!" she cried. "It's a troll attack. Please come and help us. They've got Poof." A loud buzzing could be heard from the branches of the tree. All at once the pixies swarmed around her, some of them clinging to her clothing and hair. Ivy laughed. "Thank you, all of you, this way." Ivy reached the road just in time to see Poof squirm out of the short, fat troll's grasp, leap to the ground, and run straight toward her, while the biggest troll was busy twirling the mayor's wife like a baton. Ivy reached for Poof, but the next thing she knew, she herself was being tossed up in the air and caught by the tall, thin troll. He tucked her under his smelly armpit and circled back up the road. "Yuck!" yelled Ivy as she bounced up and down. "Oh, yuck!" Suddenly, the short, fat troll ran up to them and made a grab for Ivy. He got her by one arm, but the tall troll wouldn't let go of her leg. Ivy thought she might be split in two as the two trolls played tug-of-war with her, poking and punching one another with their free hands. "Pixies, to me, yelled Ivy. In an instant, the air was thick with furious pixies on the attack. They bit the trolls' ears, poked them in their noses, pulled their hair. They even pulled their eyelashes. "Yow, yow, yowie!" shrieked the trolls, but still they held on to Ivy. Out of the corner of her eye, Ivy could see Poof, brave little Poof, yapping at the two fighting trolls and nipping at their heels. The pixies buzzed in circles around the trolls' heads to make them dizzy. Finally, both trolls dropped Ivy in the dirt. The short, fat troll pulled Poof from his leg and threw him up in the air. The tall, thin troll ran away, slapping himself and squealing something very nasty at the pixies, who chased him down the road. Only two trolls remained. Balthazar was looking for a safe way to breathe fire at them, but now the biggest troll had Poof, and the short, fat troll had the mayor's wife. He didn't want to scorch them by accident. Suddenly, the dragon felt a big sneeze coming on. "Achoo!" He sneezed right at the troll who had the mayor's wife. The troll dropped her like a boulder. He just stood there for a moment next to the grand and haughty Mistress Peevish, both of them covered with smoke and dragon snot. Then he fled down the road after the other trolls. Now, only the biggest troll was left. He held Poof tightly in one raised hand, and he was charging straight for the royal coach. He was still playing the game, and it was clear that the Queen's coach was the goal. When the coachman saw him coming, their eyes grew wide. They struggled to control the two white horses, who were rearing and stomping in terror. Ivy watched in horror as the troll bounded far ahead of Cedric and Balthazar, with Poof held high over his head. Just when it seemed the little dog was doomed to be whumped, Poof sunk his sharp teeth into the troll's finger and bit down hard. The troll roared and tried to shake Poof loose, but Poof only bit down harder. He held on until the troll gave one last powerful shake, which sent the little dog flying. Poof fell to the ground and lay still. "Poof, oh no!" cried Ivy. Then Poof jumped to his feet and shook himself all over. "I guard the Poof!" bellowed Cedric as he dove for the tiny dog. The griffin picked him up ever so gently in his talons and flew him to safety, while Balthazar let loose a fiery breath at the headstrong troll. The troll just howled in anger. He rammed the royal coach and whumped on it with his fists until one mighty blast from the dragon sizzled his fur from head to foot. With that, the troll leaped straight into the air and hit the ground running. Ivy watched as he disappeared around a bend in the road, making a high-pitched squeal that meant he was calling for his mother. For a moment, there was complete silence. The royal carriage was scorched on one corner and dented at the top. Then, from inside the carriage, there came a sound like someone crying. Ivy felt terrible. What if they had made the new queen cry? Chapter 14. The New Queen. There was a light knocking coming from inside the carriage. One of the coachmen climbed down and opened the door. "Make way for Her Majesty Queen Emmeline," he proclaimed. He lowered the coach steps, and out climbed a girl, pausing on the top step. She was not much bigger than Ivy, but she wore a jeweled crown, 2 sizes too big, and a long, fur-trimmed robe, and she wasn't crying at all. She was laughing and laughing as if she would never stop. Ivy was so surprised she almost forgot to curtsy. She could feel her own mouth turning up at the corners, and then she couldn't help herself. She broke out laughing too. Then Peter began to laugh, and Grandmother. Soon Mayor Peevish and the town council decided that if the Queen was laughing, they had better start laughing too. Before long, the whole crowd was laughing, and the little Queen laughed so hard she hiccuped. When the laughter finally quieted, the Queen came down the coach steps. She straightened her crown, then said, "I'd very much like to meet the dragons and the griffin and the girl who fought the trolls." Grandmother put her hand on Ivy's shoulder. "Go up and introduce yourself, dear," she whispered. Ivy felt suddenly shy, but she did as her grandmother said. She approached the Queen and curtsied again, then motioned for the griffin and the dragon to join her. "Your Majesty," she said, "I'd like to present the dragon who is called Balthazar and the griffin who is called Cedric." The dragon and the griffin each gave a low bow. "And who are you?" asked the little Queen. "My name is Ivy, and I live in this cottage, and these are my friends. They're magical creatures." Everyone else said they had to go. They said magical creatures caused too much trouble, but my grandmother said they could stay. "I'm so glad they stayed," said the Queen. "And who owns this little white dog? He was so brave fighting the trolls." The grand and haughty Mistress Peevish, slightly scorched, pushed her way forward to the Queen. "He's mine," she cried, wiping some dragon goo off her cheek. Her dress was black at the edges, and she still smelled of smoke. "This griffin creature has been keeping him from me." "Is this true?" the Queen asked Ivy. "I think the truth is that Poof may not want to go home," said Ivy. "He and the griffin have become friends." As if to prove her right, Poof stuck his head out from under the griffin's wing where he had been hiding. He yapped several times and dove back under. "I see," said the young Queen thoughtfully. "Call the little dog forth, please." Mistress Peevish called to him, but Poof wouldn't come. Then Ivy called, and Poof slowly crept out and sat by her feet. Queen Emmeline touched him with her scepter. "As a reward for great bravery against trolls, I declare that from this day forward, this dog, known as Poof, is a free dog. He belongs to himself, and he can make his home wherever he pleases." Ivy smiled to herself. She liked this Queen already. The Queen turned to the mayor's wife and said, "I shall arrange for you to have a new dog. You may go." Mistress Peevish looked as if she wanted to object, but she curtsied and said, "As you wish, Your Majesty." Suddenly, there was a buzzing around their heads. The Pixies wanted some attention, too. The little Queen waved her scepter in the air. "Ouch!" she cried. "Something pinched me." She dropped the scepter and swatted the air with both hands. "Your Majesty, if you please, I can help," offered Ivy. "Yes," exclaimed the Queen. "Help!" Ivy took both of the Queen's hands in hers and explained about the tiny winged people and that she mustn't swat them. She showed her how to hold her hand out and talk nicely to them. Soon an itty-bitty pixie girl came to land on the Queen's open hand and gave a curtsy. The Queen gasped in delight. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, she's perfect!" the Queen cried, "and she likes me." More pixies came and settled on her shoulders, and some sat on her crown. The Queen smiled a great big smile. Then she looked serious. She cleared her throat and climbed to the top of the carriage steps again so that everyone could see her. "My people," she began, "I have traveled the kingdom far and wide, through one lovely village after another, and now I have come to Broomsweep, the last village. There was no one to greet me in the town square. Instead, I found that the village was overrun by horrible trolls. My own coach was scorched and whumped and dented while you, my people, were in chaos. And after going to so many perfect towns, I have come to an inescapable conclusion." Everyone inhaled a big breath and held it, waiting to hear what she would say. Mayor Peevish and the whole town council and all the others stood with their mouths hanging open, and Mistress Peevish looked as if she might faint. I declare Broomsweep to be the most perfect, most unique, most fun of any town in the kingdom of Evermore, cried the Queen. It is the best town of all. Chapter 15, Ivy's Dream. A roar went up from the crowd. People threw their hats in the air and cheered. The neighbors gathered around Grandmother and Ivy, and all tried to pat their backs at the same time. Grandmother just smiled. I told you things would work out, she said happily. Grandmother invited the Queen in for tea, and also the Queen's nanny, who had been waiting in the coach. They were both pleased to accept the invitation. Queen Emmeline left her robe and her crown and her scepter in the carriage. This cottage, it's different from all the others, she marveled. And what a big, splendid garden. It must be so fun to play in. As soon as they were finished with tea, Ivy took the Queen around the garden and showed her each of the creatures staying there. The foxes let Queen Emmeline scratch them behind their ears just the way Ivy did. So did the beaver and the chipmunk. Queen Emmeline had a gentle touch, and she wasn't afraid at all. She even fed a worm to the robin. Then they had a long visit with Balthazar and Cedric and played with the Pixies. By the time the afternoon was over, Ivy and Queen Emmeline were fast friends. The next day, the royal fair came to town. Colorful tents went up in the village square, dancers danced, minstrels sang, and jugglers juggled. There was a sword swallower and a tightrope walker. A jester told funny stories and jokes. A magician did fantastic tricks. Here is a picture of the fair. When it came time for the royal joust, Queen Emmeline asked Ivy to sit with her to watch. Ivy asked if Peter could join them too. The three of them watched as two knights in shining armor tried to knock each other off their horses with their jousting lances. Broomsweep had never seen anything to compare with this. It was the finest fair the villagers could have imagined. Ivy only wished for one thing more. She had waited before asking so Cedric would have plenty of time to practice his landings. Now she took him aside and nervously said, I have something to ask you. Ask anything, Cedric replied. Bark! Griffins aim to please. Well then, could you take me flying? Ivy asked. C.T.L. Griffin, high flyer, at your service, Cedric answered, holding his head up proudly and puffing out his chest. Ivy turned to the dragon. If you're feeling better, Balthazar, would you please take Queen Emmeline flying too? I should be honored, said the dragon. But is it quite safe? Asked Queen Emmeline's nanny. Why, yes, of course, said Grandmother. There is nothing safer than riding on a magical creature. Finally, the nanny agreed. Grandmother bundled the girls up in warm cloaks, and the Queen's footman boosted them onto the creatures' backs. Ivy clutched Cedric tightly around the neck. She felt him crouch, gathering his powerful muscles. With a sudden leap, they were airborne, the dragon only a heartbeat behind. Ivy watched in wonder as the ground fell away and they rose above the treetops. A flock of birds scattered around them, and Ivy felt like a bird herself. Higher, she cried, and the griffin pumped his mighty wings faster. The dragon's wings flapped harder too. Queen Emmeline laughed. Higher, the Queen cried, until the cottages below them were as small as acorns. Ivy could see clearly across the valley and the green spread of forest next to her grandmother's cottage, all the way to the distant blue mountains. As they climbed nearer to the clouds, Ivy looked down at the town and stretched one hand toward it. The whole village of Broomsweep seemed to fit in the palm of her hand. They hovered for a time, then coasted downward in slow circles, taking in the view. Finally, they floated over the village square. Ivy could see the villagers' faces looking up at them. Everyone was waving and cheering. It was even better than her dream. At last, Cedric drifted down to earth in a perfect landing, and Balthazar after him. It was time for Queen Emmeline to go. She said goodbye to Balthazar and Cedric. She thanked Grandmother for sharing her marvelous garden and gave Ivy a warm embrace. Then she and her nanny got into the dented golden coach and rode away, with Queen Emmeline waving her hand out the window. After that day, things changed in the village of Broomsweep. It was still a clean town, but hardly anybody swept their front steps twice a day anymore. They were too busy with other things. James the shoemaker was teaching himself to juggle. Bess the candlemaker was learning some ballads to sing. And Jacob the baker was practicing his favorite jokes on anyone who would listen. After all, Broomsweep had been declared the most fun town in the kingdom, and the villagers intended to keep it that way. Since the day Queen Emmeline chose Broomsweep as the best town, the villagers had changed their minds about magical creatures, too. They even put up a sign in the village square. It said, "Magical creatures, welcome." Of course, the grand and haughty Mistress Peevish stayed just as bossy as ever. Her new dog looked a lot like Poof, only with golden-colored fur. She named her Foof, and as often as not, when Ivy went out to do her morning chores, there would be Foof hiding under the lilies. Edwina and Marta, who used to tease Ivy, came to her now to ask if she would teach them how to befriend the Pixies. So she did. Peter helped her. Ivy was so happy that she decided to forget about their teasing. Now all the children were allowed to play with her, no matter how dirty they got. And so Ivy went on working and playing in Grandmother's garden, doing her very best to live happily ever after, while waiting to see what magical creature would arrive next. And that is the end of Ivy by Katherine Coville. This is the picture on the back, one of the trolls. Thank you so much for sharing this wonderful book with me, friends. I hope you'll come back for our next read aloud or story time. My name is Cindy. I am one of the children's librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I will hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye, friends.